Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We are honored this morning to have a very special speaker. Details of his background are in the program along with the abstracts. I won't go into a great deal of detail. Tom Bearden has an extensive background in physics, nuclear engineering, weapons system. He's a retired lieutenant colonel from the Army. He's been one of our most popular speakers. He has published many, many books. There are several of them in the bookstore here at the conference. His topic today is Action at a Distance, the Fundamental Mechanisms of Radionics. Please welcome Tom Bearden.
Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to be back with the USPA. Actually, I think the first meeting here was something like '78 at Oglethorpe University. And that was the first time that I attended a USPA conference. Of course, over the years, many of the people at USPA have become, very fast friends. So it's just like coming home to come back to USPA every year and give a presentation. And I really do feel at home, and I'm glad to see all of you, and I hope you're all having a good conference and have been able to see some excellent speakers that have been scheduled for you this year. For my subject this year, I'd like to turn to radionics. Actually, the USPA started off as an idea in the brain of Jerry Gallimore, and it started off as the U.S. Radionics Congress, the first year, which I did not attend. But it started in the field of radionics. And fortunately, the absolute forefront of physics in an area in which only about 100 physicists in the world work in is now at a point where we can now begin to put together an actual physics mechanism to explain radionics. And that's what I'm going to do to the best of my ability, or try to do here today for you. So if we can have a change in slide, we'll get started. First of all, one of the great inspirations of my life early on was Thomas Galen Hieronymus and the Hieronymus device, which needs no explanation to this audience, a radionics device. This was the early one in his patent, and I got interested in it because of the fact that he could detect the different elements. And at the time, I wasn't interested in this kind of stuff. I was out in El Paso in the West, and I was doing a lot of rock climbing and mountain climbing and looking for buried treasure and some of the old Spanish stuff. And I needed a way to identify gold in outcroppings that were very difficult to get to up in the mountains. And I hit upon a possibility of maybe being able to adapt one of these things to do that. And I saw an article by John Campbell. Of course, I'm sure all of you are familiar with that article, which really just inspired me no end. That there really was a different kind of energy. The human nervous system could sense it. We may not know what it was in terms of physics, but it was real. It was a matter then of learning the phenomenology and learning how to deal with it. Little did I know what a long thing that was going to put me on, but that's what I got started in, trying to find a metal detector based on a Hieronymus machine. I never did get that metal detector, by the way, but it got me into an awful lot of other things, and of course, I'm happy to say a lot of other people got into radionics too, and that's why we're all here. Next slide. I want to point out, however, something from the absolute forefront of modern physics, that reality is not at all as simple as we've all been led to believe over the last several hundred years. As a matter of fact, if we believe what physics today, forefront physics, has to say about physical reality, it's very strange. I'd like to talk about that just a little bit. First of all, the vacuum, the emptiness itself, is not empty. It is a plenum. A little particle will form out of nothing. This is quantum mechanics. This is not Tom Bearden. It will form out of nothing, and it may be hotter than a firecracker, and then almost instantly it will disappear. It's continually being created and annihilated. And that's called a virtual particle. It's virtual because it happened so fast and then disappeared again that you couldn't grab it and look at it, what's called observable. But if you have enough of them doing this, and they're boiling away all the time, that's called electric charge when it's photons. Actually, in the vacuum, we have continuous creation and annihilation of every kind of particle or whatever you could think of in the world. And it's at such an incredible rate that it defies human imagination. We use numbers just to guess at it as, 10 to the 200th or something like that times a second in 1 cubic centimeter. But the numbers are meaningless because they're so large. Essentially, it's infinite. The fact is, however, that it's real. There are experiments that show these little critters, these little ghost critters, really do exist, and the vacuum's really built that way. It has been experimentally established, in spite of the fact that 90% of the physicists still don't believe it. It's true. Now, the other thing that happens is assemblages of these critters form. For example, just for a moment, you had the assemblage that just happened to get right for gold, for a gold atom. The next moment, you might have an iron atom, for example. The next moment, you might have a molecule of some kind. And hold on to your hat, the next moment, and this is a little beyond quantum mechanics, you could have a living, breathing being form for an instant and then gone. Everything, every possible combination that is possible is forming all the time in the vacuum and disappearing all the time. They call these ghost forms, and most quantum mechanics foundations people do not like to talk of them because it's horrible. Now you're talking about the density of reality. Because everything suddenly became real, it's only how dense it is. And if you take a ghost form and you were to increase the energy in that form would eventually materialize. And that's just an extension of ordinary quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics, however, is totally insane, to quote Richard Feynman. Nonetheless, you do have ghost forms, and this changes the idea of reality. Reality is not a brick. It's not solid at all. You have an unlimited number of forms of a very ethereally thin density, but not zero, all the time, everywhere. And if you build a structure which adds energy to one of those forms in the vacuum, you can do anything. Physical reality is hypothetically engineerable, and here I'm going to tell you for real how to engineer it and tell you where the papers are and the fact that it works on the bench. But theoretically, if you have a way to structure the formation of energy into those forms, any form you wish to name, anyone whatsoever can be materialized. In other words, we are free to engineer physical reality if we but understand the phenomenology and how to do it. Physical matter is not like a brick at all. A particle of mass in this violent flux, it's just bubbling like a fiery cauldron all the time in emptiness. A particle of mass is really nothing in the world but a stable form in equilibrium in that mass, in that fiery cauldron. It's under a continuous exchange with that vacuum of these little particles, these virtual particle flux. Now, that form, for example, let me give you an analogy. We've all seen a fast river. A log falls in the river. The water comes by and swirls and makes a swirl behind the log. Now, the swirl stays put and is a fixed form. But at any moment, the water that's in the swirl is different from the water that was in there the moment before. Are you aware of that? The water is going through all the time in great speed. But the form is stable. It's in equilibrium. And a piece of mass in this kind of river is in equilibrium just like that swirl behind that log. Now, if you disturb the log, you can disturb the swirl, and you can change it or make it do whatever you want to if you control the log and the type that goes in the river. You can do the same thing in the virtual particle flux river. The thing to remember is what we call negative charge is divergent. What do we mean here? These slides are very deep. We could spend 8 hours on this slide alone. We're not going to do that. We're going to move on. But the atoms of the world, the way the forms are stable in this level of reality, are by and largely shielded with electron shells, negative charge. And there's a peculiar little characteristic of an electron. When a photon comes in and hits the atom, it hits the electron shell. The electron pops up into a higher orbit, more energy, And somewhere around there on the other side, it drops back down and squirts out another photon, which may or may not be in the same direction. Usually it's in another direction. So the photon interaction with negative shells of atoms is a scattering process. I hope everybody sees that, because that's where entropy comes from. More and more disorder. If you have nice ordered photons marching in order into this electron shell, it's going to spit them out every which way. So you're going to wind up considering things statistically, if that's all you think about, and treat them as random variables.